go ahead and get started here. I'm Jennifer Freeman. Welcome to Purdue Center for the Environment session on working together for environmental justice in the Midwest. I'm a professor of toxicology in the School of Health Sciences at Purdue University, and I also serve as the interim director of Purdue Center for the Environment. So today during this event, we're going to feature discussions on current efforts to improve environmental and social justice and environmental health in Indiana. We're going to hear from Alan Walts, the Director of Tribal and Multimedia Programs Office at the US EPA Region 5, and a panel of speakers that are going to talk about their current projects that are working to improve the personal and environmental health of Indiana residents. At the end, we'll have a panel discussion that will be led by Dr. Ellen Wells, an Associate Professor of Environmental Health here at Purdue. So we'll go ahead and get started. First, I want to introduce Alan Walts. He is the current director of the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance in the US EPA Region 5, which serves Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, Wisconsin, and 35 tribes. The office coordinates enforcement and manages the region's Environmental Justice and National Environmental Policy Act programs. From 1996 to 2007, Alan was a staff attorney in Region 5's Office of Regional Counsel. He is a graduate of Wesleyan University and the University of Michigan Law School. Well, thank you, Alan, for joining us today. And we will begin once he's able to start sharing his screen.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Are you seeing that?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's wonderful to be here. I will note my job description has changed slightly recently. I'm now the director of the Tribal Multimedia Programs Office, so I have the great honor of working with tribes as well these days. So without further ado, I'm here to talk about working together for environmental justice in the Midwest from an EPA Region 5 perspective. Environmental justice, as you may have heard, is a very significant priority for EPA right now. We've elevated advancing justice and equity to be a fundamental principle for how we carry out our mission. And we've established as goal 2 of our FY 22 through 26 strategic plan to be take decisive action to advance environmental justice and civil rights. In my many years at this agency, since starting as a staff attorney in 1996, I do not think I've ever seen such a concerted focus on making this real within our work. There's a lot already going on in this regard. Here's some activities that happened during the past year. Administrator Regan, within days of his appointment, was sending us clear messages across the agency for how to accelerate this work. We had a number of executive orders behind us to reinforce the need to focus on racial equity and support for underserved communities, as well as the need to advance our environmental justice work as a critical and essential part of tackling the climate crisis. We have a budget now that makes significant new investments in this work across the agency. And in addition to that, we already had funds that Administrator Regan had set aside to directly invest in environmental justice initiatives that have been going on under the American Rescue Plan for some time now. So a lot going on these days, very exciting time. I want to say just a few words about what the work looks like as we move ahead and kind of where the focus is. Identifying and addressing disproportionate impacts, which are the combination of pollution burden and population vulnerability, is a major focus of the current work. This reflects the key environmental justice principle of fair treatment, and it includes cumulative impacts, which is an important focus of ongoing legal policy and science work. This is really the basis for moving EPA as a whole into the next generation of environmental protection, really being able to be more effective in identifying and addressing disproportionate and cumulative impact is so important to us as we move ahead. The earlier environmental justice work focused more on meaningful involvement, which is really another important principle. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in terms of community engagement when we get to that discussion. We have had since 2015 an outward-facing tool called EJ Screen that enables EPA to screen for disproportionate impacts, and just as importantly, enables anybody, state, local, private, public, community advocate, anybody, to use this tool to screen for and identify potential disproportionate impacts as a starting point for further consideration of environmental justice. This tool is now EJ Screen 2.0. It got a major update in February with new data layers and easier user interface, more capabilities. So I encourage folks to check out those links there and play around with that tool. There's a lot of good training videos there as well. I want to talk about quickly just a couple examples of work that's been going on in Region 5 and kind of what this shift looks like within our permitting programs. In terms of air permitting, there was a decision in November 15, 2021, approving a permit to install for Ajax Materials Corporation, an asphalt plant located in Flint. This was a significant precedent for us in how we worked very closely with the state and made extremely, in my opinion, very groundbreaking and focused comments addressing environmental justice and civil rights more directly than we ever had before, in my experience in commenting on a permit. We used EJ Screen. You can see the data from the analysis that we used to indicate to the state the high potential for disproportionate impacts. All of these environmental justice indicators are at the 80th or 90th percentile or above in terms of the relative potential for disproportionate impacts compared to the state as a whole. And we also noted the importance of considering the civil rights concerns raised by this potential for disproportionate impacts and encouraged Eagle to see whether the facility could consider alternative sites, and in addition, whether the state and the facility could engage the community to address community concerns that may not be within the scope of the air permit. So that gives you a sense of how we're really trying to bring these priorities into our day-to-day work, including permit oversight. Another very precedental example was our involvement in the city of Chicago's review of a permit for a large recycling facility in Southeast Chicago called General Iron. In this process, there, as you can see in the screenshot here, there is a tremendous amount of community advocacy raising concern about this facility. The facility, as shown in this news article, was being relocated from an area to the north in the Lincoln Park area to an area in the southeast that was predominantly low income, Hispanic. And so it raised some real questions in terms of how the city and the state and EPA would grapple with this in terms of environmental justice. The city conducted a health impact assessment. The other graphic you see here, the Air Quality and Health Index, reflects what the city is already doing to go beyond kind of what EJ Screen does and to bring together health data and air quality data to show the distribution of community vulnerability across the city of Chicago. And you can see marked there the relatively high degree of vulnerability in the area that was proposed for the RMG, or General Iron site. The health impact assessment, again, that the city of Chicago used to inform its permit decision was extremely consequential in providing us a model for how to conduct environmental justice analysis moving forward. It provides a clear sort of stepwise process through which to evaluate any environmental justice concern related to disproportionate and cumulative impacts, and to make recommendations and analyses that are focused on equity, mitigating negative impacts, maximizing positive impacts, considering equity, and considering health vulnerabilities. In fact, in the city's decision letter, the determination was based on a combination of the potential for an increase in particulate matter, noise, and diesel emissions, together with the magnification of those negative effects by it being in a population with the health vulnerabilities that were identified and documented in this health impact assessment. So a very significant development in terms of our environmental justice analysis practice. So what are some next steps? What's ahead of us now? Well, just the other day, EPA wrote a letter back to Michigan Eagle following up from the dialogue that Ajax started for us about how can we really continue to deepen our partnership with state environmental agencies? What can we really do to continue moving ahead? And so there's a number of investments and upcoming actions that flow with that I'll get to in a moment. And with the city of Chicago, we're committed to continuing our partnership with them as they commit to advanced cumulative impact assessment so that they can make it a systematic part of how they're doing business and even use it to inform changes to zoning and land use policy. So some of those investments across the board that are really going to be important for our partnership with states like Michigan and our partnership with cities and local governments like Chicago are investments in air monitoring. And another great source of funding came our way through the American Rescue Plan with more funding for air monitoring to be extended in the places where we don't have as full a network as we would like to have and where we still have to rely too heavily on modeling. And it really helps us get that very granular understanding of where the hotspots are so we could best protect human health and the environment. Another important group of upcoming actions are really about advancing the law, the science, and the policy that support our ability to advance environmental justice. So very soon we'll be publishing an update to the EPA legal tools document. This will identify EPA's legal authorities across all the statutes we administer to consider cumulative impacts, consider disproportionate impacts, enhance community engagement, and otherwise advance the goals of environmental justice and civil rights. We are also going to be soon publishing a frequently asked questions document online that will talk about the current state of practice and existing guidance on environmental justice and civil rights and permitting. And we hope that will provide more clarity for our state and local partners, as well as for all of the private parties, the folks who are applying for permits, and the community advocates who are reviewing and commenting on permit applications. We hope this will provide a greater level of clarity on how EPA understands its guidance and what our expectations are as we move ahead. In addition, there is a need for additional guidance. So we're going to be developing a framework to consider cumulative impacts more systematically. This will be grounded on the legal authorities identified in our legal tools document. And it will really help us make this real throughout our decision making. We're also going to be issuing additional guidance on how civil rights law applies to addressing disparate impacts and disparate treatment to advance the guidance that's out there now and get much more specific about disparate impact analysis and what that means in the context of civil rights law. And we're making major investments in advancing the science of cumulative impacts. You can see that link there, our Office of Research and Development that houses most of our scientists in our very science-oriented agency have put out this proposed research agenda, and they're consulting with the Science Advisory Board right now to understand how they can move that work forward. So let's speak for a moment about the importance of engaging with communities and working with communities when we're talking about environmental justice and social justice and civil rights and all of the aspects that go with really giving community members and community advocates a seat at the table and a meaningful place in the dialogue. This is all about, in my mind, in the environmental justice program, we think about it in terms of the IUPUI spectrum of a range of degrees of impact that public participation can have on a decision. And so our goal in the environmental justice program is always to move as much as we can from informing, which provides the public with balanced and objective information to help them understand the problems, alternatives, and solutions in a given situation, as far as we can towards empowerment, which again, to me, that's sitting down at the table with community advocates, along with all the other stakeholders that are part of the environmental protection enterprise, and placing decision-making in the hands of the public as much as possible so that our decisions are driven to the greatest extent possible by a community's own vision of its greatest well-being. So that's sort of our North Star as we think about all the specifics of how to do that. An example of how we're trying to make that fundamental type of investment now is something called the Environmental Justice Environmental Justice Academy. Our colleagues in EPA Region 4 came up with this model and started delivering it. We were really attracted by what it had to offer, and were able to find a local partner in the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission based in Dayton, Ohio, which had established a mission to advance equity throughout their planning area. This gave us an opportunity to apply the Environmental Justice Academy in Region 5 to our first Region 5 cohort. of emerging community leaders, with the idea being to invest in their fundamental capacity to organize and lead for change from the grassroots. So the participants in this EJ Academy are cultivating skills through 9 modules to identify environmental challenges and accomplish environmental improvement goals in their communities. The training in the modules, as well as the way that it's set up with our local government and academic partners, and set up to bring this cohort into a network of colleagues who are also graduates of EJ Academy, is to really encourage a long-term commitment to collaborative problem solving based on a shared vision among different stakeholders, so that all parts of the community have a meaningful, real voice in addressing local environmental, and I would add public health concerns. We know that we have to think about the environment and public health together if we really want to achieve environmental justice and health equity. And understanding the social determinants of health, bringing those in as factors as we think about vulnerability, has been a very important part of that important bringing together of these disciplines to serve the people. Finally, I want to note that in my office, we have a number of resources to support healthy communities. These are the same resources we're using right now to support that EJ Academy. And I welcome folks to reach out to us and engage with us. We've got a children's health program that carries out a number of training and capacity building activities focused on schools and children's health, as well as healthy homes. We have a school assistance center to really amplify that focus and bring training and resources to enhance school environments. And we've just recently released a series of 4 training videos, free training videos for AHERA compliance, that make it possible for all schools to ensure their maintenance personnel are fully trained without having to expend their precious resources on those training requirements, so that they can save their resources to directly serve teachers and students. And then that was really facilitating a cross-program, cross-region effort, where we are trying to create a center of excellence in Region 5 that can set the benchmark for how we work with schools to assist in compliance and protecting the school environment. And then finally, of course, the environmental justice program. We weave environmental justice through everything that we do to serve healthy communities. Equity is at the heart of that work. So we've got the ability to teach about EJ Screen. There's other tools such as EnviroAtlas that could be used for geographic information sciences analysis, which is so important to addressing disproportionate cumulative impacts. We have a number of grants and technical agreement and technical assistance programs. If you are interested in any of those, please check out EPA's website. Look up EPA Environmental Justice Resources. You'll see a range of resources there, and you're always welcome to contact us. You see Kathy Trantafillu's information right there as well. So that's what I really wanted to make sure I shared today. And I am not entirely sure how to stop sharing my screen here, but I'm sure I will figure out in a moment here. And I welcome, I will, do you know how to undo this? Let's see, hold on. I might just
at the top where you can stop viewing or sharing.
Okay, thank you. I'm just having trouble maximizing the screen here.
All right, well, so now we'll have time for a few questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat area or into the Q&A area. There is already a question that's available asking about how does an area get this type of health impact assessment?
Yes, thank you for that question. The decision whether to do a health impact assessment, that's a matter of engaging the decision maker. And, you know, really asking for it. It's a discretionary kind of voluntary way of doing it. There are other ways to evaluate concerns, but the first step is always to identify the key decision maker, which in this case was the city of Chicago, express the concerns about potential impacts on health, disproportionate impacts, and, you know, explain your interest. So I think doing that, oh, thank you for whoever fixed that for me. So simply starting there is the best place to start. And you are, of course, always welcome to contact Region 5's Environmental Justice Program for discussion of particular situations that you may have interest in, because we are there to advise and assist our state and local partners, and we can help them think about such requests as well.
Right, thank you. There's another question asking about what sort of pushback you might get when you try to advance environmental justice, and how do you address it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly a fairly significant change in the status quo. We are really trying to lean into, public health protection in ways that we haven't always before, and testing really our full understanding of our authorities and bringing all of the best, scientific and analytical tools we could find to bear. I think the city of Chicago work is an example of kind of trying to be on the cutting edge of that. And being on the cutting edge and challenging the status quo is inherently challenging. So folks do have questions about how that works, and legitimate questions. People want clarity. They want to understand how decisions are going to be made. So we receive that really, I would say, with an open mind and open heart. And we really just try to think about the best ways we can move forward to provide that clarity as we do the essential work of advancing justice. And so the frequently asked questions document I mentioned is one step towards that. It's spelling out in more detail what our intent is, what our recommendations are, what our process is, what we think is required, and then developing further guidance to continue that understanding. In the meantime, it's just a matter of having conversations with all the stakeholders at the table. This work cannot happen without the partnership of business and industry. And I've spoken with many partners in industry that fully understand the importance of this work and are looking to find ways to do it with us. So we turn towards our willing partners, we clarify our thinking, we advance our science, we communicate, we have conversations, and we move forward together.
Here's a question that might kind of follow along with that one, asking what happens if a city's economic interests aren't in line with the community issues? How do you work in an environment, if you might come into that question?
Yeah. We would work in that environment the same way that we do in any situation. We look, first of all, at what our legal authorities are, what our responsibilities are under the law, what is EPA's role in the environmental protection enterprise, what do our principles call us to do, and particularly in terms of advancing justice and equity, where do we have the discretion to act? So, and we work from that basis. Economic interests are important, and it's really through, again, specific dialogue that gets down into the question of the right balance between the value of economic prosperity and how do we avoid that being in conflict with the equally important value of community well-being and the kind of community prosperity that's not possible unless you have good health, good environmental amenities, and a healthy environment. It's finding ways to reconcile those false dichotomies and come to our common interest in serving the good of communities is how we approach it.
There's another question about whether or not the EJ screen will highlight drinking water quality issues in the future.
That's a very good question. I know there's been a lot of interest in doing that. It may even be that there is a layer in this latest version I haven't found yet because they put a lot of new data in there that may actually have that, but it's something that we definitely recognize would be of value. Part of the challenge with adding a drinking water layer is in terms of a geographic mapping tool, is we do get into certain points where there's confidentiality around identifying source waters on a map. But I think the real obstacle is just the ability of synthesizing that data in a way that makes sense for an indicator at a national scale. What I would say is most important when you're looking at any particular data set like drinking water quality, that is important to the work you're doing. Use EJ Screen as a base layer and layer that information on. All of the EJ Screen data is downloadable onto a GIS platform, and it's meant for folks to take that that data and bring it to the data that's most important to them, because we know we will never have even all the national information, let alone all the information that's available when you scale down to the state and local levels, let alone all of the richness of local knowledge that's available when you're talking to people living in their communities. So it's important to use EJ Screen as your table, but build up from there with data layers that are important to the work you're doing.
Would you also give the same advice then for someone who is looking to highlight green energy sources and technologies?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some states, some states are using things like EJ Screen, like Illinois is, to prioritize where to invest in solar energy and things like that. But it's going to be very hard to ever have a clear national picture that's straightforward enough to use as an indicator. So that would be a good layer to add on to support focused work.
There's another question asking about how you envision that these impact assessments are going to influence things like the permitting process.
Impact the permitting process. I think it's going to have a systematic impact on the permitting process. It's, we've already made a lot of progress applying environmental justice analysis and principles in the enforcement context because we have a tremendous amount of discretion to determine where we conduct our compliance monitoring. And so that's always been sort of the easier regulatory move. It's always been much more challenging for us to figure out how within a rulemaking structure that has a certain set of criteria and steps that a facility goes through to acquire a permit, it's always been much more challenging to figure out how environmental justice and civil rights fit into there. But that's absolutely the challenge that we're tackling now because it's so important. And I'm just talking about environmental justice. There's a lot of other work that's also going on about proactively considering civil rights compliance in a permitting process. And that would apply to any permitter that's a recipient of EPA financial assistance. So pretty much any environmental agency that's implementing any federal environmental program, plus many others.
And how do you work with smaller local governments that have less financial and technical capacity to address environmental justice?
Yeah, that's a big part of why we have technical assistance contracts to be able to do that and to also be able to sit down directly with local governments and provide our own assistance, provide the best advice we can. So I've worked with small local governments ranging from Wausau, Wisconsin to Evanston, Illinois, and we just pick up the phone and have a conversation about, what tools are out there, what capabilities are out there, what EPA scientists do you need to talk to understand how to approach your work, and we just try to be there for them. To answer the questions that they have. And I think it's also very helpful and significant that so many infrastructure resources, although I see in the chat, not as many as we had hoped, but there's still a lot of infrastructure resources, a lot flowing through the bipartisan infrastructure law to address everything from drinking water infrastructure, stormwater management, brownfields and Superfund sites. So that is providing direct assistance to smaller local governments that have been challenged to address some of those issues as well. And I think I saw a hand up as well.
Yeah, I just asked Rev Whittaker if he had a direct question for you or not. I was going to go to him next, but I think he just accidentally hit the wrong button.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you so much for all of the details and information that you shared and for addressing all those questions. And I believe you're going to be hanging around to be on the panel near the end in case anyone has more additional questions for you.
Sounds good, thank you. And I also saw in the chat, I'll be happy to share the presentation. So I'll send it to you all and you can distribute it.
Yes, and I believe we're going to be posting this also on YouTube too for people to view afterwards.
Excellent, all right.
Thank you. All right, we'll transition into our second part of the session now, where we're going to talk with some leaders that are working in various areas on current projects. To lead this section of the panel, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ellen Wells. She is an environmental epidemiologist and an associate professor of environmental and occupational health in the School of Health Sciences at Purdue University. Her research focuses on how environmental factors affect human health, with a focus on those with a higher exposure or susceptibility to environmental factors. Much of her research focuses on neurological health impacts that are associated with exposures or multiple contaminants such as heavy metals. Through this interest, she has worked with communities in East Chicago and Gary, Indiana region to really help promote community health. So Ellen, thank you for being with us today, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. So we have an excellent panel of speakers from across the state who are actively working in various areas of environmental justice. And so what we're going to do for the next part is I will introduce our 4 panelists, and then they will have a short period of time to talk about their own work and initiatives within environmental justice. And then following that, we will have a question and answer session with the full panel. So I'm going to start with Jason Kelly. Are you ready to start, Jason? All right, wonderful. I will introduce you and then I'll let you take the helm for a few minutes, all right? So Jason Kelly is the director of the IUPUI Arts and Humanities Institute, as well as chair and professor of history in the Indiana University School of Liberal Arts at IUPUI. His current research projects focus on the history of the environment, sciences, and art and architecture, and he's currently working with communities in Indianapolis to record oral histories as part of the Voices from the Waterways project. In the environmental justice space, he works with Dr. Gabe Filippelli, also at IUPUI, and an extensive team on a community partnership project focused on communities in Indianapolis related to health effects of lead in soil. So.
Great. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see so many people here this morning. Just to get us started a little bit, I think the reason I'm going first is because I'm kind of taking a more theoretical approach to this to get us started. And that's because a lot of my research for the last decade has focused on examining the concept and the experience of this thing called the Anthropocene. So for some of you who may not already be familiar with this term, the Anthropocene, let me give you a quick explanation of what I'm talking about here. So the Anthropocene is a concept that geologists began using roughly 20 years ago. I'd say geologists and earth system scientists. And this was an idea that got adopted by a lot of disciplines over the last 20 years. And it's been used in lots of different ways. But at its core, the idea is an argument that humans have so transformed our planet that we've entered a new geological epoch. The Anthropos, the human age, the Anthropocene. This suggestion states that our current epoch, geological epoch, as understood by geologists, the Holocene, which was generally defined by kind of stable climates and relatively warm, or I should say mildly warm climates since the last ice age, is being displaced by this new geological age that, of course, we understand through one of its major elements, which is global climate change. And this is going to have huge effects on things like agriculture, human settlements like cities, for example, that the age of the Holocene helped make possible. Now, some of the arguments are that roughly over the last 200, 300 years or so, in the wake of the Industrial Revolution, human actions have threatened the Holocene state of things. So most notably through the burning of fossil fuels, the release of CO2, but also things like pumping more nitrogen into the Earth system, things like phosphorus transform the water cycle. The climate change has helped create conditions of ocean acidification. And of course, things like pollutants have been kind of on a global scale as well, such as nuclear radiation, plastics, which we often experience today through that concept of microplastics. They're getting into all aspects of our lives. So the Anthropocene is kind of this big narrative that talks about biogeophysical change. The Earth is rapidly changing, and this is caused by humans. But the important part for our conversation today is that this change is changing the living conditions of people from around the globe. And I'd say that and I think most everyone would agree that the conditions associated with the Anthropocene are some of the biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge that we face in the 21st century. So it includes things like climate change, but Anthropocenic conditions are more than climate change. They're pervasive throughout all levels of society. And that kind of gets us to the question, of environmental justice. So the Anthropocene is not simply a product of human actions, but it's also the historical processes that created the conditions of climate change, the transformations of the water cycle, nitrogen, all of those things I talked about. And that was driven over hundreds of years and continues to be driven by sociocultural processes. For example, if you think of the release of CO2 during the Industrial Revolution, it was made possible by centuries of social, political, cultural, and economic processes. Things like the development of global capitalism, global trade, imperialism, warfare, the growth of fiscal military states, debt financing, enslavement of millions of peoples around the globe, colonization, and the development of banking systems. So to understand the Anthropocene actually means understanding these historical processes that create feedback loops between human actions, those sociocultural processes, and biogeophysical systems as well. And it means understanding them at both the global level and at the local level, and how they are experienced at these multiple levels. So at the core of these processes, you're going to note that the conditions that created the Anthropocene, things like colonialism, enslavement, global extraction of resources, these are also tied to historical injustices. And so the global processes associated with global climate change, et cetera, are also tied to these local conditions. And so on the projects that I work on, our approach is really focused on recognizing that understanding and responding at the global and regional levels are also intimately linked to understanding and responding at the local level and vice versa. So to give you a sense of what this looks like in our work, let me share my slide, just a few slides with you very quickly. So you'll notice I have some QR codes on some of these slides. So if you have your computer screens open and you have your phone handy, you can easily get some of the links that are in the slides here. All right, so at the core of our work around the Anthropocene is what we call our Anthropocenes network. And I'm not going to go into details why we call it the Anthropocenes, except to say that as will become clear in the conversations today, the Anthropocene isn't simply a thing, but it's a process that is experienced unequally across the globe, and unequally even in communities like where I live in the Indianapolis region. Our Anthropocene network works with both local scholars and artists and community members and policymakers, but we also work with folks across the globe on a number of these different projects. So our Rivers of the Anthropocene project is really focused on freshwater systems around the globe. Our Museum of the Anthropocene project is a kind of experimental art projects to help get people engaged a little bit more with understanding their environments and engaging with their environments. As already mentioned, the Voices from the Waterways is an oral history project. So we're working with folks to better understand their experience of the environments in which they live. And finally, the project that I want to focus on today is the Anthropocene Household Project, which actually works together with the Voices from the Waterways project in the sense that it also does oral histories. The Anthropocene Household Project is kind of a simple idea. The idea behind it was to take kind of this global concept of the Anthropocene that looks at these big system transformations of water, CO2, and flip it on its head and try to understand better how people experience that at the household level. So we've been working with a number of really wonderful partners in the central Indiana community, as well as some other folks in other areas on campus to run this project called the Anthropocene Household, which has an educational component to it, where we do environmental justice seminars. We have, as I've already mentioned, the oral history component to it. And then finally, we have a project that we're working with the School of Science, which is a lead testing program. And this lead testing program is focused on households. And what it does is, what we're trying to do is get kind of house-to-house data on lead levels in soil, in dust, and in water in people's homes. So in the video, you can see how the lead testing kits that we're distributing work. But what we're doing is we're distributing these lead testing kits and working with community members to collect information from their homes so that we can do a couple of things. One, so we can give people back data on any lead that they might be facing or might have in their home environments so that they can mitigate those things. But also so we can build data sets that help us better respond to the problems associated with lead testing at a policy level as well. So what you'll see here is one of the ways that we present this data. And this is really my colleague, Gabe Filippelli, in his lab pulling this information together. But they've created these layers of information and they have a global project going on this that looks at water, dust, and soil. And you can pull that information here. So this is really what we're attempting to do at the environmental justice level in the Anthropocene Household Project, which is to work with communities to better understand, to work with communities to educate people around the city about environmental justice and more specifically threats such as high lead levels, and then to have a scientific component of this to collect this information, give people back data that they can use to respond to any challenges in their homes that they face, and then work with policymakers, community organizations to respond at the larger regional level as well. So I'm just going to stop there, and I think we have plenty of time for questions at the end.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly, for that introduction to get us started on this second portion of our event. Next, I would like to invite Reverend Curtis Whitaker to tell us a little bit about his work. So Reverend Curtis Whitaker serves as senior pastor of the Progressive Community Church of Gary, Indiana. An alumnus of IU Bloomington, he's a licensed and ordained minister whose focus is pastoral care and counseling and community and economic development. In terms of environmental justice, he works extensively with his community to help improve the health of others through initiatives such as FAITH, which stands for Families Anchored in Total Harmony, which runs Faith Farms, which is part of an active local foods movement. And Reverend Whitaker, please tell us more.
Thank you to the other panelists, to all those who are watching. Thank you for coming, sharing, and joining us on this important conversation today around environmental justice. As mentioned, our church, Progressive Community Church in Gary, we received just so
Looks like you're having a little bit of connection issues, Reverend Whitaker.
Is that better?
Yes,
is that better?
I can hear you better now.
All right, sorry about that. Our church about 9 years ago began a quest for urban farming or in urban farming. In that quest, we started real small, 3 raised beds. Our major concern was to raise food. We wanted to know where our food came from. We had a vision from God that there would be a famine in the land. And at that time, didn't know anything about growing food. But one of the things we were certain to do was not to grow into the soil, into the earth. The condition, if there were any contaminants in the soil. And so we grew on raised beds because we didn't want, we didn't know, we didn't understand the science around soil testing, didn't even know how to go about getting a soil test. But we knew that in order to grow food in a traditional sense, some way that you need soil. We grew a lot of food, said we would step our game up. The next year, we added to what we were doing. But then secondarily, soil is important and the soil health. But then we also began to consider the water and what contaminants or things could be very little about how to go about water sampling, water testing, and those kinds of things. And so we had a partnership with the university who provided us with some interns. Those interns then did water sampling and understood that our water was good to utilize on our food. But then that got us into just trying to understand even more this sort of relationship between healthy soil and clean water as it relates to growing food in a traditional sense in the ground and in the soil. And as we began to grow and to grow the farm, grow the amount of produce that we grow, we got even more into why it's important. Soil, water, why it's important. We're now a USDA certified farm. It grows about 15,000 pounds of food a year. We use organic practices to grow our food right in the middle of Gary, Indiana, right in the heart of downtown Gary, which is a blighted community. Most of the communities and houses when they were built with lead-based paint. And so we saw that as an issue. We have subsequently had, again, both water and soil tested, and they were both good. In addition to that, understanding our need for pollinators, about 4 years ago, we embarked on a plan to build a pollinator park. We wanted to attract pollinators, birds, bees, butterflies, to pollinate the plants that we place into the ground. Last year, we completed phase 1 of the pollinator park, which was the removal of abandoned structures, overgrown weeds and things, so that we could, in our partnership with Purdue and its landscape architect class, put in the pollinator park again, which we've completed phase 1 of. They provided us with 17 renderings. We wanted to have all native plants, shrubs, trees, native to Indiana, and all things that attract pollinators. But in our role in this area, we discovered that bees were becoming extinct, and we know we need bees to pollinate. And so this began us on a journey of how do we teach others about the importance of not only pollinators, but clean air, clean water, and healthy soil. And so our next project initiative, in addition to completing the pollinator park, is to build an urban environmental learning center where we can teach youth and adults. Because again, 9 years ago, I was, and still am to some extent, a neophyte in some of these areas, but we want to be able to, I believe, as Alan mentioned, move from one place to, this place of empowerment, where we're empowering individuals in our community to take control and understand what all of these things mean for life and for healthy living. So we're in the initial stages of building an environmental learning center that will have our plan is that it's powered with renewable energy, whether that's solar or wind. We want it to be empowered in such a way so that we can also share and show how renewable energy plays into this important conversation. The renewable energy for us is nothing new. About 6 years ago, we were one of the first churches in Gary with solar panels on our roof. And those solar panels, when we initially installed them, we did it for a number of reasons. One, we're a faith-based entity, we're a church, and we believe we have a call from God in Genesis to be good stewards of the Lord's creation. And so we did it, number one, for that reason. Number two, we wanted to reduce our carbon footprint. We have about 30 panels on our roof, and we believe this is our small way of tackling this large issue and concern relative to climate change. And then three, we wanted to continue to invest, so take the funding that we will save from installation of the solar array, take the funding from that and then reinvest it into the farm, reinvest it into community and other projects that we have for the future. Our goal in the renewable energy space is we're, again, in the middle of a blighted space and a blighted community. So we come from this, not necessarily from a technical place. So I appreciate all of the technicians that are on the panel today, because they help us understand even more about what we're doing in practice. And so our goal, in addition to the Environmental Learning Center, is to create a solar farm that is a community-owned solar farm. Give an example. We're in a blighted space. There's a senior building that was built 4 years ago. When the senior building was built, the residents, about 36 of them, were told that they would not have to pay utilities. A year later, the decision was changed. The members of the seniors in the building came to us with their concern now pay for utilities when they didn't have to. That was such a concern for us that we began to look for ways to empower our community from a solar perspective to help meet some of the needs of the residents. In our residents, our median, in our community of Emerson, our median household income is $13,000. And so we have a true need for renewable energy, food, and our food insecure community, and other things that we can do to help our residents in the Emerson area, in the Emerson community and neighborhood. We also want to have our area looked at in the city as a pilot, eco-friendly neighborhood, eco-friendly community, so that we deal with health issues, so walkability or bike ride, bike share. And so a number of things that we are doing to help change the face of our economically challenged community from an environmental justice perspective. And again, we're just happy to be here today. to share with you what we believe is our small way of joining in this discussion and conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Whittaker. I think that's a really inspiring example of how communities can take action. Our next panelist is Denise Abdulrahman. She is a member of the national staff for the Chisholm Legacy Project as the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley Special Project Manager, and serves as the Environmental and Climate Justice Chair of the Indiana State Conference of the NAACP. In this role, Abdul-Rahman led Our Youth Scientists in East Chicago, Indiana, and a delegation to the US EPA Region 5 regarding the Clean Power Plan. Currently, she leads the support for building equitable clean energy projects, Hammond, Evansville, and Kokomo projects, models for power up clean energy jobs to infuse the Black-Green pipeline, and equitable clean energy policy and practices to spur minority and women business enterprises, fair chances, and geographic imperatives. She also works on the just transportation and equitable goods movement. She holds a BS in management, MBA in healthcare management, and a health informatics designation from the Indiana University School of Informatics. She's a Black woman, foreign war veteran of Operation Desert Storm. And without further ado, Denise, please tell us more.
Thank you, Dr. Wells. Thank you to the Center for the Environment at Purdue University, Lafayette, where I was born. Grew up in West Lafayette and married student housing. My father is an alum of Purdue University. My grandmother retired. So I am a proud associated Boilermaker, I guess, for lack of a better term. So thank you for having me be here. The NAACP, of the Indiana State Conference, we have 35 branches across the state of Indiana. We have 5,000 members across the state. And then, of course, our national office. In my previous role, I served as the Midwest and Plains states. So we have members all over the Midwest. And we continue on a regular basis to work on our community's transformation and liberation. And I have a new role with the Chisholm Legacy Project, which is working in the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley. And much to that same point, we work with communities across the nation in freedmen settlements and so forth to support their ability to thrive and to be resilient. And we work on this through a framework called the Just Transition Framework, which talks about resisting, rethink, and restructure, how we shift the economic control to communities, democratize wealth and the workplace, advance ecological restoration, drive racial and social equity, relocalize most production and consumption, and retain, restore cultures and traditions. So basically that is our theory of change in which we work. And I many times share a story around, where I come from. I identify as a person of African descent who survived the transatlantic, whose people survived the transatlantic slave, enslavement, Jim Crow, redlining, James Crow, and the school to prison pipeline. And many of our communities are over-policed, our educational systems are under-resourced. We live in blighted and dilapidated housing. We are the underemployed and we are the unemployed. We've been the essential workers during this pandemic, most disproportionately impacted. We are the hosters of the polluting systems, such as fossil fuels and vehicle emissions, and most disproportionately impacted and vulnerable by the impacts of climate change. And we believe that all institutions, all agencies should be adhering to the HEMES principles, which there are 6 principles about being inclusive, doing bottom-up organizing, letting people speak for themselves, working together in solidarity, building just relationships among ourselves, and having a commitment to self-transformation, and also adhering to environmental justice principles, of which there are 17 of those. And the NAACP Indiana State Conference, we work every day to battle against environmental injustices, which we include this as including climate change. That disproportionately impacts our communities of color and low income in Indiana, the Midwest, the United States, and around the world. And this program was created to provide resources and support to our community leaders in addressing this human and civil rights issue. And we typically advocate for 3 objectives. One is to reduce harmful emissions, particularly greenhouse gases. We do this by shutting down the coal plants, by shutting down other toxic facilities. We work on ensuring that the stopping of building of new toxic facilities, and our members work to advance and strengthen the development and monitoring and enforcement of regulation at the federal, state, and local levels. And we also focus on corporate responsibility and accountability. We work to advance energy efficiency and clean energy. So we work in policy frame to pass renewable energy and energy efficiency standards. We work at the local level with small businesses, with the union, labor unions, and others to develop demonstration projects that ensure that our communities of color are accessing the revenue generation opportunities in this new energy economy by also providing, and also while providing safer, more sustainable mechanisms for managing energy needs for our communities and beyond. We work to strengthen our communities' resilience and livability. We work to ensure that communities are equipped to engage in sustainability, climate action plans that integrate policies and practices on advancing food justice, that advocates for transportation equity, that upholds civil and human rights in emergency management, and facilitate participatory democracy. And I also want to add that when I say we work to, it's our units that are across this state and the communities that they serve. And we also at the state level have been working with environmental justice grassroots organizations across the state. And we have established a Justice 40 environmental justice table. And then I just believe pictures are 1,000 words, and to humanize this process. So these are real people. This is Faye Moore in Michigan City. She was the president at one time. Now she serves on the sustainability city committee, and former EJ chair named Anna. And others of Michigan City. You can see the cooling tower. We held a cold-blooded training there. Many of them suffer from asthma. They've been fighting against the unregulated coal ash that is there. They've been trying to shut down the plant before 2028 and been at the NIPSCO. And so they've been working on their right to breathe plus. Several years ago, and Alan was there, we organized folks from across the nation, particularly in Region 5 of the EPA. There we have youth members of Kepra Institute. We've got LaVejo there. We have the Minnesota NAACP at the time chair, Gary NAACP chair, Dr. Carlton Waterhouse. We organized around the Clean Energy Incentive Program and around the Clean Power Plan at the time. our members and our partners that we're connected with in this very important work fight every day for clean air, climate resiliency, and energy, which is inclusive of water. And they fight every day to obtain the real net zero, which is to keep fossil fuels in the ground. Just this past Monday, we launched, I had a ribbon cutting ceremony in Kokomo, Indiana, where they're going to deploy 70 solar panels. This will reduce CO2 emissions, they said, equivalent to taking 6 cars a year off the highway, or 63,000 miles, or equivalent to planting 16,000 trees a year. This will also reduce their energy burden of the building there, allowing them to give more back in their mission to the community, which is a Black and brown low-income community. It will spur economics, jobs. In fact, they're partnering with Crossroads out of South Bend, who hire returning citizens or formerly incarcerated folks to manufacture solar panels. And it will be an educational component because it's in the Douglas Center, which is a historical Douglas School, rather, where Eleanor Roosevelt came. So it's a historical place. We donated $35,000. You can see the Power Up Kokomo jobs there. And this is the historical school here. It will be a resilience hub. It will be educational, not intergenerational educational to the youth and to the elderly or older folks. And it will have history, and it will be restorative in that history and resilience. This will have showers in it for when the grid goes down. Kokomo's impacted by tornadoes and impacted by the industrial waste that was left behind by the auto manufacturing industry. And also it will act as, it will also be there for when the grid goes down, people can charge up their phones and things of that nature. And then this is just more that we have done around the clean energy in Evansville. We placed this on the Greater St. James Community Center in the 4th Ward, an environmental justice community near the power plant there. They were within the 30 miles, which is what our cold-blooded report talks about. They are working on energy efficient housing. They are working on training these persons shown here. We're being trained with a partnership that I put together with Midwest Renewable Energy Association, which I serve as the vice president, and they have an online training to help folks get certified in solar. And we partner with the city on clean action planning and so on and so forth. This was a phenomenal work that we did in East Chicago, what we called the Our Youth Scientists. We also did the Our Community Scientists, working against the 91,000 parts per billion of lead that community was impacted with. This is the science guy, Mr. Coleman. Unfortunately, we lost him a few years back, but he was with the Urban Enterprise school there. We partnered with Indiana State University with Dr. Jennifer Latimer on a process where we did have the children go home and collect the soil in their lawn. We had them take their water bottles and bring water, and we had them do a dust sample with the dust square and bring it all back to the school. And then the doctors there helped to test it. We also did that with Joseph Block Middle School as well. And we did it within the community with the partner First Baptist Church, with Reverend Douglas Sloss. And we had the children speak to their legacy of how they're going to be impacted and what they can do about it, how they can use media and how they can test and be community scientists, and how EPA should utilize their science and their information that they gathered themselves. And this was at Joseph Block Middle School. And last but not least, we have our Gary, well, we have EJ chairs across the state, about 8 of them that are working hard to create the resilience or environmental justice within their communities. This is Lori Latham, who has apparently been fighting against the Fulcrum company that wants to take waste and turn it into jet fuel. And she said that, hey, Gary is already a dumping ground, that they didn't need any more, polluting systems in their community. I also believe in that area. Of course, you've got the steel mills, and then you've got this Maya energy plant that was impacting, I believe it's called the Steel Academy School there in the area. And then of course, Gary lives near highways. And then all of what Reverend Whittaker has indicated on his great body of work that he is working on. So I just want to say that the NAACP and in all of our communities, these are just little microcosms of a huge, systemic problem and challenge. And our members across the nation and in Indiana are working out of necessity, not for projects, but for their necessity of their ability to, and their right to live a thriving life. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a very informative presentation, and it's really inspiring to see all the work that you're getting done in this area. We will continue with the presentation from our final panel member, and then we will have an opportunity for the question and answer session. So I see that some people have already been posting questions, and please continue to do so, and we will get to all of them shortly. So our last panel speaker for today is Dr. Julie Peller. She is a professor of chemistry at Valparaiso University, and much of her research is associated with emerging contaminants in aqueous systems with a current focus on microplastics. She works towards environmental justice through citizen science projects such as her current work in Gary, Indiana, and along the Great Lakes shoreline. She works with both Dr. Reverend Whittaker and Dr. Wells. This is true, we work together, as well as with community groups in the East Chicago region. She also serves on the board of directors for the Hoosier Environmental Council and is a longtime champion for environmental health and equitable access to clean water. Dr. Peller?
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you for the invitation to take part in this very important event this morning. And yes, I've been working with Dr. Wells for a number of years, as we've found that we have backgrounds that complement each other in working for environmental justice. And as she mentioned, I am a chemist, and so my training was in a lab, learning a lot about water contaminants. So how did I get involved in environmental justice? Well, I would say this was somewhere in the range of 12 to 15 years ago, when I met Kim Ferraro, who is an attorney at Hoosier Environmental Council. And she was looking for what she called technical assistance, so the science side, to assist her with her efforts in the EJ realm. And I have to say, there's been a very high learning curve for me in taking science into actual communities in order to assist in these sorts of issues. And so what I learned first and foremost was how little I understood about what was on the ground science issues, and listening to community members, realizing that they have a lot more understanding of the pollution exposures than I did as an outside scientist. So learning from the community and recognizing they live in these areas 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and understand a lot more than the scientists actually do. And because of that, as I've moved forward in the work that I've been doing, I've always indicated to community members, you are the voice that directs what the scientists need to do. You need to be first and foremost at the table. And so I've, like I said, I've learned that over the years, and I've also expanded my science applications from just being a water scientist to learning about how to assess air contaminants, and then also in soils and dust, as we've assisted the East Chicago Superfund site community in the past. And I've done this, like I said, with the assistance of the Hoosier Environmental Council, HEC, but along the way have met lots of great people and have interacted with them as well. And most currently, I'd say in the last several years now, Dr. Wells and I have teamed up with some other scientists, and we kind of bring different backgrounds to the table. She is the epidemiologist and more of the public health expert, along with some of her other colleagues at Purdue. Ken Brown is also a chemist at, he's at Hope College in Michigan. And then my colleague Chris Eisman here is another chemist. And then we work with Graham Peasley, who's a physicist / chemist. We also have Professor Jody Allen from Purdue Northwest on board as part of our team, and more recently, Dr. Erin Argelin from IU Northwest. So we bring in different areas of expertise, and we've been working with community members. We've developed a community advisory board. We're always open to more members on that. And again, that community advisory board, we look to direct what we can be doing to help assist the communities of North Lake County. And I think that I am going to leave it there, Ellen. I don't have a presentation to show, but I just wanted to introduce our group and what we're doing. We've done a few, we've had a few events where we've basically screened water for lead. We've done some screenings for soil, lead in soil, but we definitely are interested in doing a more comprehensive assessment, because North Lake County has all sorts of chemical exposures. It's not just lead. There's lots of clean water, clean air issues in North Lake County. And so as a group, what we intend to do going forward is to do more of a comprehensive assessment, which I'm just very pleased that the EPA is also focusing on recognizing these impacts, not just singularly, both time and space, but also comprehensively moving forward. So I think I'll leave it at that, Ellen.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we are all set to have a lively discussion. So actually with the discussion, I'd like to start with some of the questions that have been posted in the chat, because they have been here for a while. So one of the questions from the chat, I believe, is directed towards Denise Abdulrahman, where the question is, do your organizations view electric vehicles and charging stations as a viable solution to addressing EJ issues in Indiana? If yes, what steps are you taking to advocate or increase charging stations in areas such as Kokomo?
We have worked on the legislation. I believe it was House Bill 1221, where Representative Cherish Pryor championed an amendment to the electric vehicle legislation that requires now that charging stations, electric vehicle charging stations, be placed in diverse, and I believe it says equitable and diverse communities. We have been advocating for similar narratives in the 21st Century Energy Task Force all along on all areas of energy development in Indiana. But as it relates to the electric vehicles, we think the charging stations are important because they do produce revenue. If the charging stations are placed on communities, let's say a non-for-profit, including the Douglas school that I just showed, if it's placed on that parking lot, that will provide more revenue to the Douglas school and thereby allowing them to do more of their work. Also, we're proponents of the jobs that will come from charging stations installations, the apprenticeships and training opportunities, not to mention the manufacturing of electric vehicle charging stations and of course, electric vehicles. And then ideally, of course, we want our vulnerable communities, which data shows communities of color are most highly impacted by vehicle emissions, to benefit from the electrifying of, our children's school buses and of course, all the vehicles. So we want the prices to go down on electric vehicles so that we can also access them. We want the city buses, we want the electrification, and therefore those charging stations need to be in those communities. So when we become the adopters of the electric vehicles, we will have places that we can charge up. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So did you have something to add to that? No? Okay. So I have a couple of questions for the panel myself. So we can start with a question I had for Jason Kelly. And my question for you is, what are significant knowledge gaps in Indiana regarding environmental justice?
Sure, thanks for the question. Yeah, so I come from the humanities, so I'm going to use my humanities perspective to kind of answer this question a little bit. The word knowledge gaps that we have in Indianapolis or in Indiana leads me to think that we should talk a little bit about knowledge first, and where does knowledge come from and how it's shaped. And it's really a combination of things. And we've been talking about this all day today. I think every speaker has implied this, right? So our understanding of the environment comes from our lived experiences. It comes from our traditions, whether these are embodied in cultural traditions, institutional traditions, et cetera. It's in our legal systems. Knowledge comes from our scientific models and disciplinary perspectives. And so when we think about knowledge, it's often good to think about whose knowledge and for whom is the knowledge being created. And this, I think, in the environmental justice space is really super important. For example, when we're talking about environmental policy knowledge, we're not just talking about data. Data doesn't exist outside of contexts, right? We're also talking about power in society, and we're talking about how knowledge is a function of power and vice versa. So knowledge in the 21st century, so knowledge that we have today, is particularly created and shaped by institutions, right? And I mean, it's fairly obvious being in a university driven conversation today. University research drives this. Corporate research drives this. Federal and state legislatures and municipal governments drive how knowledge is created and understood. Regulatory and environmental agencies, the EPA, IDEM, these things are really important in shaping our knowledge. And all of these things are, of course, shaped by politics. They're shaped by economic interests. Again, back to culture. They're shaped by culture. So because of this, when we ask questions, we need to kind of think about the relationship between knowledge, power, and policy. So what kind of data are we, and what kind of data are we not using? What kind of data are we collecting, and what are we not collecting? Who's doing the collecting? What are our motivations for collecting? What kind of questions are we not asking? Not just the questions that we are asking, but what are we not asking? And then when that data begins to be used, that knowledge begins to be used, who has the power to make the policy, to shape the policy, to implement the policy? And then how is this data being used to implement these policies, and for whom are these policies being implemented? And so when we think about knowledge and its role in environmental policy, and I really, when I'm saying we, I'm particularly thinking about my own positionality as a faculty member in a research institution. We constantly return to kind of what kind of knowledge and knowledge creation processes we're privileging. And as a result, whose questions, concerns, and experiences are we both privileging and or marginalizing? And so to answer your question, then, this gets us back to the heart of the original question about knowledge gaps in respect to environmental justice in Indiana. And so I'm just going to maybe, because I know this is a conversation, so I'm just going to point out 3 areas. So one, and this is the thing that we're here to talk about today, is community engagement. When it comes to environmental justice, community engagement is obviously essential. That's clear from our conversation today. Local knowledge is important for identifying environmental injustices, and just as importantly, how justice and injustice functions on the ground. So again, this has already been mentioned today as well. So local communities may even define environment differently than I'm thinking of researchers going in there. When we were doing oral histories, we started with the question of how do you, when you talk about environment, what do you mean? And very quickly, because we're working in the city of Indianapolis, flora and fauna were, of course, these are parts of the environment. But in urban ecology, people were really emphasizing concerns over safety and policing in the city as essential components of the environment. So that's the first thing, is the community piece of it. Then what I mentioned before, I think is really important, is the historical processes, and these can really often be forgotten. And of course, they've been mentioned today: white supremacy in the United States and in Indiana, the histories of these things, segregation, unequal access to economic opportunity, political power, legal voice. And these are all tied into air quality, heavy metal contamination, tree canopies, water qualities, brownfields, coal ash ponds. These are all connected to each other. So historical processes, I think, is a gap in our knowledge, in part because it's so important to frame these at the center. And then finally, the last piece I would say is there's a gap in the education piece of it to some extent, as I see it. And part of this is, while we're having real conversations today about justice, about publics, about leadership, and about future leaders, to have a real conversation about environmental justice in Indiana means having really uncomfortable conversations and probing those pasts and coming to terms with those histories. And I think there's a great challenge right now when people are confronted with histories that trouble them, to want to avoid those conversations. And so I'd say those are the 3 big things that come to my mind.
Thank you. That was a very thoughtful answer on many levels for that. Did any of the other panelists want to weigh in on that particular question about significant knowledge gaps related to EJ?
I just want to add that I think that also that definitions of words are place-based oriented. So I work with many different groups, and we work on shared understanding. So equity in Gary can be different with equity in Indianapolis, and environmental justice, to your point, environment, what that means are different based on where you're placed.
Thank you. I think that's a great addition. All right, so my next question is going to be for Julie Peller to follow up with your presentation. Many of the panelists and others who have been speaking today have mentioned engaging partners from other sectors in the work on environmental justice. And what strategies do you use to make these partnerships, and what are the benefits of these partnerships?
Thanks, Ellen. The benefits are, well, it's critical to have these partnerships. And as Alan talked about, having this collaborative problem-solving approach, it's absolutely necessary. And so I'm looking at Reverend Whittaker going, he's one of my partners. And so we reach out to each other for a number of reasons. And without having partnerships like the one we have with him, we're not able to really make any changes in the community. We're not able to educate the community. I agree with Jason, there is an education gap. Currently teaching an environmental justice course at Valparaiso for the first time ever. And it's very well received by the students. I'm hoping a lot of them are participating today as well. But this relationship and the cultivation of relationships is so very important. I think that one of the things that I learned was I thought, okay, well, I have a certain set of skills as a scientist. I can go into communities that need to measure contaminants, and they're going to welcome me and say, oh, thanks for coming. And that wasn't the case. And Pastor Whittaker and I have talked about this, and there has to be a relationship that develops a trust between people, and so you cultivate that relationship as well. And there's just there are a lot of benefits of that beyond just sharing data. And of course, Ellen, you're part of this too, and you know we've been doing this, trying to do our best to reach out to communities and let them know we want to listen to you. And the academics have this past reputation of coming in and going, all right, we want to collect data and we can write a paper, you know, add that to our CV and all is well, but that's not what our group is all about. And we never have wanted to do that. We've always wanted to interact with the community in a way to figure out how we can use our skill set, how we can bring more scientific education into the community, understand what these exposures mean, to do some analysis of exposures. People have gotten mad at us because we've found that the contaminants that they were convinced were in their world we were not able to measure. But we have to rely on science and what science tells us. So we've teamed up with the Sojourner Truth House. As I mentioned, HEC is very helpful. Recently gotten to know Kimmy Gordon and her group, the Brown Faces, Green Spaces, and more recently they've put together a group called GUARD, the acronym GUARD. So we've tried to, we work to continue outreach. Yesterday, I got a phone call from a resident in Hammond who wanted to talk to me about the plastic waste pollution that we studied at Lake George. And so talked with her. So just having these relationships and different ways of people with groups, we found I believe bringing youth into it. And so what Denise showed there with the youngsters is just fantastic. This is the world that they're inheriting. Although we've been challenged a little bit in trying to get into school systems, but I think that that's definitely a good way to create or to lessen that information gap and to develop relationships as well. So there are many ways to do it, and it's something that we try to, like I said, work on as much as we can and with the time that we have to do that.
Thank you. It's a really complex issue.
Mm-hmm.
Would any of the other panelists like to weigh in on that particular question?
I would say that engaging partners is critical to the work that we do on the local level. As I mentioned, I'm not a practitioner. This is not the space that I practice from a theory perspective. I think I learn well, but we're on the ground doing the work, and oftentimes we can become so focused on just getting the work done that we miss some things. And so developing relationships, engaging partners who are, who practice, who understand the science behind it helps us as we practice. We're a diverse voice. Oftentimes what we see, and especially in Gary, we get studied all the time. And I'm studied out, and I'm sure that most of the folks in Gary are studied out. And so that's why we pride ourselves on doing, but we understand that there has to be a relationship between the two. You just can't do without, having some thoughtful dialogue and conversation. And it helps when there is a diverse group, diverse voices, all bringing where they are and who they are to the conversation. And so that's been helpful for us as we've engaged a number of universities relative to the work that we've been doing.
Denise, I would like to just say, I forgot what it's called, but it's kind of like a round robin of tables. I was participating in something like that at Duke University. And in that forum, what came out was the aspect around the community science and the what should be a commitment or obligation of academia, a set of norms that should be required that science stay with that community, that there'll be some type of ownership, I think, of that data, and that, yes, that you can't just collect the data and then like leave with the data and then the community doesn't benefit in any way, that some kind of a norm that says every aspect of what's going to happen to that data and community's ability to access it at all times. And so I don't know if that's something, well, obviously here in Indiana that can be shaped, but that was something that came out of that roundtable type of, I forgot what, around the world or some kind of thing that it's called. So just want to share that.
I will say, Denise, that everyone that comes into our space, we ask those questions. So we're very thoughtful about, because again, we've been studied to death or to life, however you want to look at it. And so we don't need to be saved no more. That's what I tell folks when they come, looking to save us. We don't need you to save us. We're looking for partners in the work that we do, and not just any partners, but true partners. I think Julie mentioned that are willing to build relationships, because that's where partnerships start. It starts from a relational place. So I'll tell you, I contacted Julie because we owned some property, and the property had used to be a gas station. And so my concern was, are there tanks still in the ground? And I didn't know, how to go about doing that research. I contacted Julie, Professor Peller, and lo and behold, she knew someone, I believe, that she shared with us who was intimately familiar with that gas station. It was crazy. And shared with us all of the information that had been sent off to IDEM, sharing with us that the tanks have been removed, sharing with us, if you're going to build on this space, here is how you should do it, understanding that tanks used to be in the ground, all things that honestly I would not have any clue about, but it was because of the partnership and more than partnership, the relationship that we built, that we were able to get some things answered. But again, I just think, just from my place in Gary, and I share this with folks who come knocking on my door, I have a set of questions, and they all lead to what Denise mentioned, you know, that you're going to ask us for info, but we're not going to be, you know, we won't get any recognition in the, if this paper wins an award. So if I'm not, so we did this with another university. It's like, hey, I want the person that's working with you, I want her name to be listed in this, because she's providing you with real, you know, data on the ground, and the university did that. And because of that, her name was listed in the dissertation that was done. She added value to it, and got recognition when the project received an award. And so she can put that on her CV. And it just helps build up for us. For me, it's helping build up everybody else that's around us. And all of us are then participating in this win.
And I feel like if we have capacity, right, what would it look like if we built those norms and that every institution already knows them? And then those that are the EJ champions on the ground don't have to exert energy, right, in that space, trying to make sure that this person is recognized, trying to make sure, you know, if it's already written, or worst case, you can hand it to them. Make sure you comply with these norms and sign this. And then you don't have to, you know, you're still going to have to make sure that they do it at some point, but at least they will have received it from the very beginning too. So all those principles, and yeah, those are all the things that have to be built in order for the systems to change what's always been the norm, helicoptering into communities and exploiting them and so forth.
Yeah.
I would, just one last thing I would add is onto that point is what I noticed is the blinders that the universities have. We've dealt with at least 6, and there have been some blinders relative to even looking at that, because they're so focused on whatever it is trying to be accomplished. And so when we take a step back and have those conversations, for some, it's enlightening, and they want to be able to say, how can I help? How can I do this? How can we do this together? How do we move forward differently? For others, unfortunately, it's not that way. And we've experienced that on a number of occasions, because, well, here's what'll happen. I've had this happen. Folks will say, yes, we will do ABC 1, 2, 3, you know, but there is nothing that I have a stick, but I can't beat somebody with a stick, right? I have a carrot, right? I can't, but you know, once you get information from me, there is nothing else. You know, we can sign an MOU, we can sign, you know, all of those things, but that's where those relationships come into play, where, you know, that at that point it's back to the individual to actually do what they say they're going to do. And we have had instances, even after having conversations, you know, honest conversations about, you know, here's how we believe we've been treated, and we don't want to be a one-night stand no more. we want to, you know, we want a long-term relationship, and we want to be able to control some of the process, or even if not control it, we want to share in this sort of power vacuum that exists, so that all of us come out of this with not one feeling used and taken advantage of, and the other feel like I got everything I wanted.
Yeah, I think that's a great conversation, and one that I, for one, am willing to initiate within the university setting to see how can we get this more broadly recognized. One comment I have about how we might start to do this is to have this, you know, all faculty go up for review periodically, and to emphasize that working with communities is a really important facet and should be recognized as valuable work by the universities. And I think that would also help with this process. It's not it's not always valued the same way across all universities. And so in order to make that change, I think we need to work on some of these incentives for the individual faculty members who may be otherwise distracted by pressures within the job. So I'd like to move on to a question that was posted in the Q&A, because I think this will spark another round of interesting conversation here. This was directed initially at Dr. Peller, but I think that everyone probably has some important insights on it. And the question is, what do you see as the main obstacle to your work in within Indiana or your particular regions of the state that you are working in?
The main obstacle, funding. Science and this kind of work requires financial resources. And so for the 12 to 15 years that I've been working on this, I've been trying to get significant funding and have been unsuccessful. So we feel, those of us that have been working together, that we make progress, but it's very slow. We want to make progress on a much faster scale. And so we continue to seek out some funding that will allow us more time and give us opportunity to work more with our students and with the community members to get additional equipment, to do more environmental testing and human health and respect of human health testing. So that really is the most difficult part.
All right.
I would add, from what we've seen, it's funding is key, but also just people don't understand. Just lack of knowledge in this area, and sharing really at the lowest level is as simple possible, why this work is important. Oftentimes it's missed, and people don't understand the whys behind it. So I think, and coupled with funding, is just that we're able to share this information in a way that people can grab hold.
I think we're having some
problems.
Yeah.
I wanted to add, are you back, Reverend Whittaker?
I think I am. Sorry about that. Better? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize for that. Just the education piece on ground level, and individuals understanding why it's important to advocate.
Yeah, I fully agree with Pastor Whittaker about that. And he and I have had that discussion as well, just trying to impress upon people how important it is.
I think one of the most challenging issues is the policy frame, and also the mindset, the corporatist mindset of really putting profits before people at any cost, to the expense of our climate, to the expense of people's environment. And if we begin to create systems that are like human-centered, like what would be the impact to this community before we build it? Can we build a better system? My great co-founder, now director, Jacqueline Patterson, said, hey, we created the vaccine in record time to save people's lives. so we can create, you know, equitable systems at a record time. You know, if you want to go far, go fast. If you want, you know, I'm working in a lot of places with intentionality, you know, because we want to try to get it right so that we don't make the same mistakes that we made in the past. So I think the biggest barrier is building the proper system, the proper frame, and how we want to go forth. And are we in alignment on how we want to go forth? You know, do we want to continue? Insanity is repeating the same, I forgot what the same, but you know what I mean, doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So we can't do the same thing and get a different result. So what is the new thing that we're doing? Are we in alignment with it? One of the things has been that we've always had the same status quo. So right, let's bring all the different voices, those that are disabled, those that are, you know, people of color, indigenous. Let's bring everybody, women, and let's have a rigorous, robust way of building the way that we want to go, so that we can create the change that many of us at this table believe in, you know, and so we can get it right. We can do better, you know, in my mind, than carbon capture sequestration. We can do better than, you know, manufacturing that puts out emissions. We can do better, you know, so let's create those systems. Let's include those voices, because the genius comes from everywhere. That's something that I've really learned. You know, nobody has the market on genius. It comes from everywhere, and it comes from people that listen to all sources of knowledge and is able to synthesize it like a, you know, like a quilt or like a symphony or what have you. So thank you. Sometimes I get upset, so thanks.
Well, I think I speak for all of us, seeing the looks on our faces when I say that we appreciate your contribution here. Did any of the other panelists want to weigh in on the question of what the major obstacles were? And by that, Alan Walts, if you want to weigh in on this too, please feel free.
Thank you. I am just loving the chance to hear this conversation, and it reaffirms everything that I believe about what happens when you really center communities and you treat community leaders and members like partners. So I would just underscore, you know, it really is all like that proper frame is really important. And I think to me, that's a lot of what it means when we say that advancing justice and equity is as fundamental to our mission as following the law, following the science, and making our decisions transparently. So I really welcome that way of thinking. You know, in terms of establishing that basic understanding about environmental issues, I think it's a big part of what the EJ Academy is working towards. People who understand how the environmental enterprise works and how to interpret environmental information are empowered right there and then. So I also want to direct folks to, in the chat, the link I dropped on citizen science at EPA. We do look at this as a really important way to address what Reverend Whittaker was pointing out is, you know, collaborative problem solving means collaborative research, collaborative science. It means that everything is collaborative and everything is really a way of advancing a vision of community well-being. So again, I'm just delighted to be able to hear this conversation.
Thank you. And I believe Jason Kelly had something to add as well, correct?
Oh, I don't have much to add. This has all been wonderful, and I agree with everything that's been said. So I will leave it at that. I don't have anything substantial.
All right. Well, we have time for one last quick question. I don't see anything else coming through on the chat. So I will pose one last question to everyone. In what do you envision for the future of working on environmental justice issues within Indiana? We don't have too much time, so if you could keep your answers brief, and we can conclude the panel on looking towards the future.
Well, if I may just jump in here and pick up on the theme of time, right? So there we have the opportunity to move fast when we want, right? But we also work in timeframes to do science and produce knowledge, which do take certain amounts of time. And community engaged work takes time, right? Those relationships are long-term commitments. And so in the future, I see our institutions responding to that and recognizing that we can move quickly when we want to do something, but we have to put the resources in place so that they're there for the long haul. Right. So we're not, I mean, again, from the university perspective, we're not extracting, but we're working as part of communities. And it takes a different vision of time, I think, for our institutions to get there.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll just add that we're working on the Justice 40, helping our members to identify their quote projects or what they're working on really for their own livelihoods, and helping them to meet with the different apparently officials that they need to speak with. And then we're working on putting into the stratosphere, like I'm doing right now, with all the organizations, all of the various allies, because equity is not just on, you know, the people of color, those that are already oppressed. Equity should be moved by everyone that believes in equitable systems. So ensure that your entities are moving that 40% to those, quote, disadvantaged communities. And you don't have to answer this, but I do wonder, like, if US EPA have the guidance of its own document that requires anyone that's going to be receiving these resources to metric and show you that these 40% are going to the disadvantaged communities. That's what we're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad to have your leadership on this, Denise. It's really important. Yeah, EPA is working on guidance. We just had the screening tool released by the White House that will help us identify disadvantaged communities and make that intentional investment for restorative justice. And it's going to take ongoing partnership, though. I mean, these collaborative partnerships are what is going to help us really guide those resources to the places where it's needed the most. So this is sort of our call to collective action here these days, and definitely feel that sense of urgency. Time's a-wasting.
So there'll be accountability metrics, some kind of way that you'll be able to document that
Yes,
Region 5 or the state of Indiana, as it relates to EPA, moved its 40% to, thank you.
That's what we're working towards.
All right, wonderful. Well, that does conclude the amount of time we have for today. So I would like to take just a quick moment to thank all of the panel members and all of the attendees for taking the time out of your day to come and engage in this amazing discussion that we've had. And I will turn it over to Jennifer Freeman for some final words.
Thank you, Ellen. Yes, I just want to echo Ellen's thanks to the speakers for your contributions today and these excellent discussions. I want to thank all of the attendees for joining us today as we continue the discussions and sharing of information to really learn about the ongoing activities and future plans around environmental justice by the communities, organizations, university researchers, and the EPA in our state and region. And I think while there are so many current activities that we're hearing about today, we know that there is so much more that needs to be done. This is the second session that we've sponsored. The Center for the Environment has sponsored in this area. We aim to have future additional events. We want to continue to bring together everyone to inform on the needs and future directions. And as we've emphasized today, the importance to really build the relationships and cultivate the partnerships that we need to work together to address these community-driven needs. So I I recommend you guys please just continue to watch the Center for the Environment's website. Our newsletter, if you're not getting our newsletter, please contact us if you would like to be added to our mailing on that. We'll continue to announce our different upcoming events. You can also directly email the center at environment@purdue.edu. And of course, you can follow us on social media to keep up to date on the event. So again, a large thank you to everyone today, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.